Welcome to kathysright.com, your pit stop for the conservative mind, heart, and soul. I'm Kathy. Today we welcome our special, I'm going to say, favorite guest, Tim Enlow, fellow patriot, a man who loves this country. Did you watch The President? I have a hard time using that word when I'm referring to him because I still don't feel like it was legit. But I just finished watching The President. Did you, Tim?
I did, indeed.
What did you think of Mr. Biden?
A little bit what I always think. I always feel like at certain points in his speeches, it's like he feels like he has to talk to the American people like we're children. I always feel a little bit talked down to. And it's painful, obviously, especially on this subject. Because I know without a doubt that 95% of what he said was just completely dishonest, and he's misleading the American people on Afghanistan 100%.
Do you think that it comes from a birthplace of having a history of lying and being a politician for his whole life?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what a lot of politicians, after they've been in there for a while, they're going to say or do anything to remain. The constant campaigning and promises and all these things, right? It just becomes second nature to them. But he's absolutely, I mean, you know, when I heard him talk about, and again, it felt like he was talking down to the American people, the reasons we went into Afghanistan to begin with, that we never went in there to nation build. You know, we went in there for one reason and one reason only, and that was to get Osama bin Laden and kill Al-Qaeda or reduce Al-Qaeda's ability to operate there. Yet, when I was in Afghanistan and Mr. Biden visited, he was all about nation building, and we took him to various projects, nation building projects to watch around the country, as he did in Iraq as well. He supported nation building in Iraq, and he's on the record of supporting that. And now suddenly he's like, no, it was never about nation building, and that we should have gotten out 10 years ago, which is just incredible, right? Yeah, he's spinning the facts.
Yes, and I wonder who his handlers are listening to. I mean, it sounds to me like not only does he have handlers, but he has handlers who are working for some other entity, almost as though. I mean, it seems like these conversations that he's having with America seem canned.
Absolutely right. They're just, they're not sincere, and I think that shows through in every speech that he makes. And again, it's hard to be sincere when you're lying and misleading people, and he is 100% lying on everything almost that he said in today's speech.
Okay, so Tim, you have some experience with military.
Yes,
don't you?
I do.
What is your experience?
I was in the U.S. Army. I was in the U.S. Marine Corps, and then I spent about 7.5 years, a year and a half in Iraq, and 6 years in Afghanistan as a security contractor.
So when you were there, was it clear to all the soldiers? Was it clear what the mission actually was?
Well, I would say, obviously, the mission did change throughout the years. We went in there initially in 2001 with special forces teams and just bombed the living daylights out of the Taliban and basically had all of them scrambling back across the border to Pakistan, where they hold up until things calm down. Right. Obviously, after we installed the Karzai government and started helping the Afghans form a government and started getting their country back on track. The mission did change then for the first time, right? It started becoming more focused on the politics and, again, on helping Afghanistan rebuild from years and years of oppressive Taliban rule where, you can't even almost call it governance what the Taliban were doing when they were in charge, right? Because they had no idea how to govern. And so when the new government was was set up, a lot of focus was on that, teaching them how to govern a nation, right? And that takes time. And then of course, we spent years spinning up and creating, literally from the ground up, a Afghan national police force, an Afghan national army. And then once it was deemed that those forces were becoming better or somewhat better, then presidents, as we had new presidents come into power here in the U.S., they wanted to shift it to slowly turning over more and more responsibility to the Afghans for their own security.
So how did we come to where we're leaving the Taliban, the actual people we were bombing, and the actual people who were restricting all the women's rights over there? I mean, the burqa, I mean, you can only see maybe their their pupils. How did we get from there to where we're leaving them? How many billions of dollars worth of equipment is what I want to know. And to you, as a veteran, does it feel like a win?
No. I mean, nothing about Afghanistan at this point feels like a win, because it's not. We lost, just like we have to be honest and say we lost the war in Vietnam. We lost this war in Afghanistan. We have to be honest about that. And that's not the fault. That's not laying the blame on the soldiers who bravely fought over there. Right. But certainly, we failed at the upper political leadership in our country and at the upper military leadership, to be quite honest, in our country. Yes. They failed us in Afghanistan, quite frankly. And
I felt that way when I listened to McKenzie speaking yesterday. He sounded like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he made it to. Is he a major general?
Yeah, I'm not sure. He's a CENTCOM commander, is what he is. And so I'm not sure if he's a major general.
The major general has the 2 stars, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, right. So that was the other guy with the big bags under his eyes. I can't remember his name. But
are you speaking about Milley?
Yes, I think it is.
Right, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
Yes.
Right.
How did he ever make it to be a general?
Well, I mean, the military is politics at that level. The military is politics as well, right? And so, it's. I can honestly say, and I think that's been the hardest part for me and many veterans, is that I think for the first time in our lives, we feel completely let down by I think most veterans don't expect a whole lot out of civilian politicians, right?
Correct.
They come in enough contact with them, or they've seen enough happen to where they know, they see what happens here in the U.S. with politicians, so they don't expect a whole lot out of politicians. But I think they do from their military leadership, and they should. Military leaders should trust and believe in their military leadership. And I think for the first time in a very long time, most veterans feel completely let down by the upper military leadership, and I certainly do.
I'm seeing a lot of anger.
From the Joint Chiefs of Staff on down. I would say from General Milley on down to the CENTCOM commander, Kenneth McKenzie. These men obviously did not fight for their troops. They didn't stand up for their troops, and I think that's plainly obvious. And I think we can even say that they probably needlessly cost the lives of those 13 service members we just lost in Afghanistan.
That was devastating. I think the entire country feels like we got punched in the stomach.
Yeah, I mean, because again, let's look at accountability. We had a president of the United States who in May stated publicly everywhere that, on every appearance that he made, that we would not be in a rush to withdraw, as far as that the way he termed it is the withdrawal would be safe, And it was anything but safe, as we could see, and orderly. Safe and orderly withdrawal from Afghanistan is what he promised. And that was in May. And here we are 3 months later, and it was complete chaos, complete breakdown, unnecessary loss of lives. And as you and I are speaking right now, Kathy, I mean, there's reports pouring in that the Taliban are going house to house in Kabul right now and executing Afghans. That blood is on President Biden's hands and on the Joint Chiefs and General McKenzie, as far as I'm concerned.
As far as I'm concerned as well, I really felt, I saw pictures, I saw footage of doors being knocked in already. And I mean, we're getting that just from, I don't know what kind of sources that they're getting these videos from. People send me so many videos, frightening videos.
It is. It really is. Absolutely. And it's all, it was so preventable. The president made it sound in his speech just now, he said there was two choices: either stay there and continue to lose American lives, right? Or withdraw, right? And he basically made it sound like those were the only two choices. And first of all, that's a lie. Okay. We hadn't lost a U.S. soldier in Afghanistan over a year, first of all. But let's say we did need to go on the offensive temporarily to halt the annual Taliban spring offensive, right?
Okay.
So it's important for people to understand is that the Taliban don't fight in Afghanistan during the wintertime. Right. And it's been that way forever. Right. Winter times are always slow. They can't move effectively across snow-covered mountains, and the passes and the roads are in poor condition and all that. Right. So they always launch every spring for 20 years. They always launch what we call their spring offensive. Right. Their spring and summer offensive. Right. The military knows that. The military prepares for that. And, so first of all, whoever decided to schedule an evacuation of U.S. military personnel in the middle of the spring and what we knew was going to be the middle of the Taliban spring and summer offensive, they should be sacked immediately just for that decision alone. Right. Correct. That's not the time to launch a full-scale evacuation of the country. There were much better times that we could have chosen to do that. The second thing is that, for almost ever since the Taliban started gaining strength again in Afghanistan, right? We sent young soldiers and young Marines out on these patrols for 20 years to look for the Taliban, right? We wanted to find them. We wanted to engage them or, discourage them from, certain provinces and territories and things like that. And, in a lot of these cases, these Marines were killed and maimed by roadside bombs and IEDs without ever laying eyes on the Taliban, right? And here we have the spring offensive where the Taliban is moving at such speed that even the Taliban are surprised. Even the Taliban are surprised at how quickly the ANA, the Afghan National Army, are folding. And so now, for the first time in 20 years, they're traveling in large groups in vehicles. It's a target-rich environment. If ever there was a time for us to launch massive airstrikes again, that would have been the time. And it would have been the same results as we had in 2001 when the Special Forces did it. They would have had to scramble back toward the mountains, toward the further out provinces, and hole up there. And that way we could have safely evacuated the country, right? But instead, this president and apparently his advisors decided, no, that's going to look bad if we're doing massive bombings with U.S. aircraft, because that's going to make it seem like the war is in full swing with American involvement. And then why are we pulling out, right? And so it was all about optics to this administration. It was all about optics and not about truly accomplishing the mission. And that's why the evacuation failed so terribly. And
that's why these soldiers are so angry. Because it was all about the optics and not about... It was
all about optics. It was never about any kind of plan that made any kind of military sense. And I think we're going to find, as we often do, that when Biden is out of office, co-conspirators like General Milley and McKenzie and others, they're either going to go and make the TV rounds, and then they're going to tell us what really happened.
And then they're going to come out with a book.
Or they'll come out with a book, and that was going to be my next thing. Or they come out with a book, and they lay all the blame on Biden and his administration. Because again, if you listen right now to what the president said, and he has said this repeatedly over the last week, and that is that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense all agreed with his plan, his administration's plan for this withdrawal. And that's hard to believe.
Yeah.
We have public statements from General Milley, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, earlier in the year, when he was strongly advising the Biden administration to keep about 4,500 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, even after the withdrawal, to bolster the Afghan National Army and to make sure that there's not a complete collapse. So
they folded.
They folded, predictably.
Yes, and quickly.
Right.
Well, how could they not? I mean, they were faced with now Taliban, who was well armed.
Exactly. Right.
And they're going
with our weapons,
and they're showing them off on camera, smiling at our cameras with our weapons, and they're on. Oh, I can't even tell you how upsetting.
Well, and a lot of, I've seen a lot of anger directed at the Afghan National Army, and, even by some veterans. And a lot of people are saying, well, if they don't want to fight for their own country, why should we? Right. But I think some of the guys and some of the people are forgetting that, we had such a hard time for 20 years trying to get the corrupt government in Kabul to properly support their own military and police, right? There was just so much corruption from the top down that the average soldier often lacked the basics. The average Afghan soldier often lacked the basics that he needed: food, pay, medical service, a decent leave rotation where they actually get to see their families once in a while, right? All these different things that affect the morale of an army, of any army across the world, is going to be affected by these things. If you don't pay your troops and you don't feed your troops, and often your troops run out of ammunition, well, then those troops don't have a lot of reason to keep fighting. Right.
Yes, they have to have something to fight for.
Exactly. And that was the other thing, is that as long as we were there, we couldn't always make the system perfect. But a lot of our people that were embedded with these Afghan units, our military personnel, tried their best to make sure that those units got the basics that they needed, right? And they were, like I said, it wasn't always 100%. There was a lot of hiccups there, but we knew it was going to be better than if there's no Americans there holding the government in Kabul accountable, right? And so, when I see Biden now talk about how nobody could have predicted how quickly the Afghan army folded, a U.S. Army soldier
could have predicted
of the rank of private who'd spent any time around that Afghan army could have predicted.
I think two little kids playing with toy soldiers could have figured this out.
Anybody could have figured it out, right?
I mean, haven't you done that as a child? I played with my brother. We had the little plastic toy soldiers. I would have never thought to leave my tanks behind. Leave my
who leaves their toys?
And then we retreat. Now you sometimes retreat is tactical, but this was not a tactical retreat. In fact, we left them well armed in order so now they can harm other people.
Well, and that's the other thing, right? Is that, first of all, we had a blueprint for this, right? It's not like this is the first time in history this has ever happened. It happened in Vietnam too. Right. We pulled out. The South Vietnamese army could not hold. The North Vietnamese came in and rolled over them. Right. And seized a lot of American equipment in the process. Right. Armored personnel carriers and tanks and guns and a lot of things. So we had a blueprint for this. We knew what the likelihood was of what was going to happen because we tried Vietnamization, right, is what Nixon called it. We tried Vietnamization in Vietnam, trying to turn over the war effort completely to the Vietnamese, and it was an utter and abject failure. Mm-hmm. And all the reports coming out of Afghanistan from the Office of Inspector General, SIGAR, all these different organizations that were going over there and evaluating the progress of this, we're all sending reports that were setting off, or should have set off, nothing but alarm bells that this army was in no way capable yet of standing on its own without American support and without some American troops. Wow. And those warnings were ignored. Quite frankly, they were ignored by the Trump administration too, somewhat. But the one thing I will say, because obviously you heard a lot of blame from Biden toward the previous administration.
Yes, and he lied as well, because he said that Trump didn't have any conditions. Right, and Trump had lots of conditions.
There was lots of conditions. And as we've seen many times, one thing the previous administration was good at was reversing course when necessary.
Yes.
Right. So if he saw that there was problems as far as the speed of which, and President Trump didn't make a secret out of the fact that his eventual goal is he too wanted out of Afghanistan, but he wanted it done in an orderly fashion that would not lead to a collapse inside of 8 weeks of the entire country. And I think we all know that there's no way he would have allowed that to happen.
This shows weakness from the top, not from our military.
No, absolutely.
From the top. And he's been weak since the moment he took office.
Right.
And everybody's seen that. I mean, the man literally held his face in his hands just the other day in self-pity, I guess. Right. I don't think he was compassionate. This compassionate Joe that they sold the American people, I don't think he truly exists.
No, it's an act. It's an act. And we saw it during the very somber ceremony at Dover Airfield when the remains of the 13 service members came home and he's checking his watch. Right?
Yes. I saw that.
That's not compassionate, right?
No,
and it certainly didn't make the families feel like he cared.
Each one of those soldiers, their draped bodies in those caskets came off. Right. Each one of the fathers said he checked his watch.
Right.
And someone tried to toy it off by saying, "Oh, well, he does wear a rosary around his watch arm, and maybe he was looking at that, remembering his son." Oh my gosh. Really?
Yeah,
that's rich, because
that's grasping at straws.
Oh boy, they're getting real slick. But I doubt he was looking at a rosary. Even if he wore a rosary, that would be a prop for him.
Right.
That would not be something he was literally, because you just cannot be a person who lies so easily and claim. I as a Catholic, he's an embarrassment to me. Well, there's many in the hierarchy right now that embarrass me as a Catholic, because I just can't stand the idea that every time he says that, I just cringe. I'm like, you're a what? Yeah. And then Nancy Pelosi, the same thing. Yeah. I cringe when I see her. I'm like, oh God, please don't say something about your church, because I don't want to claim you. I just, please don't. But this Biden, the back of his bony head is about as much as I can take of him.
Yeah, it was definitely a painful speech to watch. I also found it ironic that he dared mention, that we went in there to get Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. And while completely leaving out that as soon as we pulled out, bin Laden's former security chief and a very senior member of Al Qaeda is already back in Afghanistan now, arrived in Afghanistan. And, so Al Qaeda, he's not there to help nation build, the Taliban nation build. I can assure you, he is there to oversee the Al Qaeda network that is going to once again grow and prosper and train with one mission in mind, and that is to attack the United States of America, both here in the homeland and abroad, anywhere they can.
And I'm fearful also because everybody knew this was coming eventually, that we were going to leave, that with our open borders, also a Biden policy, right. I'm sure that the Taliban enemies are already here. Because those open, porous borders were an invitation to everyone who hates us to come on in and set up shop.
Right.
So while we're working on our infrastructure, and while the Taliban's now working on their infrastructure, there are cells, I am sure, in this country already plotting to harm us.
Oh, absolutely.
And we have to be, if a person wasn't a prepper before now, you better become a prepper now. Yeah. Because unlike before in our history of the United States of America, my father taught me something. He said that we are very spoiled here. We just know that all the wars are going to be fought over there.
Right.
Over there. And so we just assumed that we're going to be safe and sound. And so we didn't prepare as though, and when people fight wars, they don't say, oh, we're going to only fight here between downtown and the suburbs. We're not going to go into where the women and children are. Because my father was in the Korean War, and he says they very much were fighting where families were.
Right.
So this is something we have to be aware of. And see something, say something means a whole new thing today.
Well, and the sad part is, again, the incompetence, the complete incompetence that this administration demonstrated in trying to extricate, itself from Afghanistan shows that they are ill prepared. I had to laugh when he sat there and said, General McKenzie, as he stated, that we knew that this evacuation was going to be made under stress and under duress, and we planned for that. And I'm thinking to myself, if you planned for it, why did you have to scramble 6,000 troops over there post haste to get there?
This is the plan?
To even just be able to hold on to the one last little piece of real estate in Afghanistan that we had any control over, and that was the airport, right? We had lost every other piece of Afghanistan had been given up. And the only reason we held that airport is because we sent 6,000 troops over there in a hurry, right?
And McKenzie was talking about how we were cooperating and coordinating with the Taliban at the airport. I'm thinking, are we on the Twilight Zone?
Well, and that's another false narrative that he's been pushing here lately. And I've heard him say this now several times. For example, when he talks about every time he would mention ISIS-K, he would say, who are the arch enemy of the Taliban. Like he's working really hard to try to separate ISIS from the Taliban. Reason being is because if he doesn't, and we're handing our security over to the Taliban, then, and they're friends with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, then American people start asking questions like, whoa. But basically the way he tried to sell this was the Taliban are not as bad as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Listen, at any time, these groups work together if it's to their mutual interest, okay? If ISIS were such arch enemies of the Taliban, then when the Taliban went into Bagram airfield and let 5,000 prisoners out, including a significant number of ISIS fighters, they would have executed those ISIS fighters right there on the spot. When they came out of the prison doors, they would be like, oh yeah, you're ISIS, boom, right? They didn't do that, right? And they allowed those ISIS fighters to remain in Afghanistan, which is how they were able to plan the suicide bombings of the Kabul airport. So Mr. Biden sitting there trying to tell the American people what arch enemy ISIS-K is of the Taliban is just, it's fairy tale, right?
Yeah.
They may not always pursue the same goals. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they were don't they read from the same Quran?
Well, absolutely, right. And
and aren't we infidels to both of them?
Sure, and they ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, they all believe in a very fundamentalist version of Islam, right? Now, again, their political goals may be slightly different, or how they choose to approach that may be slightly different. But just as we saw in 9/11, when Al-Qaeda was in Afghanistan, the Taliban at that point, if you listen to them, nothing has changed in these 20 years. In 2001, they tried hard to convince President Bush that Al-Qaeda didn't represent the Taliban, and the Taliban didn't really have anything to do with Al-Qaeda, and yet they wouldn't turn them over.
I remember that.
Which is what caused President Bush to say, because remember, you gave him a deadline, said, look, turn them over, and then, you can spare yourself us coming over there and getting them. Right. And so here we are 20 years later, and this president keeps talking about looking into the future, not into the past. But the only problem with that is he hasn't learned a damn thing from the past, because he's repeating every single mistake that's already been made in the past. So,
so basically it's the American definition of insanity.
That's exactly what it is. This administration is definitely that, that definition.
Do you think we'll survive it? I mean, will we survive Biden? I mean, for instance, do you think he'll make it?
Well, there's two questions. As a nation, will we survive Biden? Our nation is going to be forever changed. I will say that. It will not, and faster probably. Our nation is changing faster right now than it probably ever has under any previous administration. You can see records are being set everywhere, whether we're talking about the border. We've never had this many illegal immigrants pour across our country's borders in our nation's history. Yeah. We've never... We lost a war now, which we haven't done in a very, very long time. And, there's no doubt in my mind that we are now laid once again, the groundwork for a significant terrorist attack on our homeland. And again, exposed, whatever troops we have in other countries overseas to more attacks as well, and American citizens as a whole, not just our troops, but American citizens. What
do you think will come of the Americans that are left behind there?
Well, they better keep a low profile right now, and I'm sure they are. But
because the Taliban has a history of taking hostages. ISIS has a history of taking hostages.
They do.
That's what I fear.
Right. And I think right now the Taliban and some of these other groups are weighing probably the pros and cons of doing that. They could have done that already, obviously, right? Yeah. They control the city. They could have easily already taken many hostages. But I think they're treading a little bit carefully right now, because deep inside they still know the military might of the United States and that they're no match for that, right? If they did something significant enough to force an American president to act. And so I think right now, temporarily, I think they're probably still going to want to kind of buy some time to get, because remember, their drive across Afghanistan was at such breakneck speed. They captured cities at such a frantic pace that they haven't even had time to fully institute and set up all the governance all over Afghanistan. And they need time to do that, because that's the way they remain in full control, right? And they do still have a few thorns in their sides. We have the National Resistance fighters that are in the Panjshir Valley that are led by Massoud, the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, who fought the Taliban for many, many years, and so they're up in the Panjshir Valley. They're holding out right now. So that's the last pocket up there that's really holding out. And so the Taliban still has some work to do to really solidify their control. They have control, but they need to solidify it. And so I don't know, as far as the hostages, I would definitely say Americans are in danger. There's no doubt about that. But it's also important to remember that, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but Biden touched on it a little bit. There was a lot of private, behind the scenes efforts going on to get people out of that country that were not military related. And a lot of those were carried out by veterans and NGOs and things like that. So nonprofits. And, I would assume that work is going to continue. But again, I don't want to delve into that because we have Americans over there and we want them to stay safe and we want them to get out safely.
I see a connection with what's going on in Afghanistan as well as our border, which I think you are an expert on that. But I see a connection because, for instance, I've read about heroin coming from Afghanistan. And we know also that from China, we get about 99% of the fentanyl. So with the open borders, we didn't just traffic in. They didn't just traffic in children, which was evil in and of itself, but also drugs. So I see a connection with China here.
Oh, sure. Well, China has already, they have made no secret that they are already working together with the Taliban. I believe the Taliban is hoping for and will get significant funding from China in exchange for mineral rights. I think the Chinese are interested in a lot of mineral rights in Afghanistan. The Chinese have already been mining there for quite some time in Afghanistan. So I think that, what's the number? I can't remember, but it was close to $1 trillion, but definitely in the multi billions of dollars of potential still mineral rights that are at stake here. And the Chinese are very interested in those. So I think the Chinese will give the Taliban weapons. I think the Chinese will give the Taliban money. And,
what do you think about they keep emphasizing that they left helicopters and different kinds of weapons that they said that they were not usable. And I don't buy that. Are they saying they left them without the keys? I mean, what do they mean?
Well, first of all, we know that's not true because we've already seen some Taliban flying around in some of the Black Hawks that we left behind, right?
Right.
Now, it's important to remember, and people are like, oh, the Taliban, they can't fly helicopters anyway. Listen, it's not the Taliban that came across the mountains from Pakistan and were carrying AK-47. That's not who's flying the helicopters. The ones who are flying the helicopters are the Afghan soldiers that we trained to fly those helicopters. So they know very well how to fly those helicopters, and they are now part of the Taliban. I mean, when the Afghan army collapsed, whoever couldn't get out, they are now, if the Taliban comes to your door and says, we know you were a pilot, and if you want to live and if you want your family to live, you're going to fly this helicopter for us. That guy's going to say, absolutely, I will fly that helicopter. Absolutely, I'll show you how to run that armored vehicle. Absolutely, I'll show you how to use that U.S.-made machine gun, right?
Right.
So, yeah, they have them. We shouldn't have left it there. It's and that's another thing on the U.S. military. It absolutely astounds me that the U.S. military did not insist on destroying that equipment.
Yes.
Right.
They could have put it all in one pile and bombed it or something.
Yeah, I mean, and especially, like I said, once the Taliban's, once you had made the decision to surrender these cities, I get you can't blow it up, right. Beforehand, because then now the Afghan soldiers are going to be like, wait, you're blowing up our equipment that we're supposed to be using, right? I get that. But like I said, once the Afghans abandoned those positions and all those vehicles, for example, in I believe it was Kunduz airfield, where they had all these MRAP armored trucks and drones. They had some drones there. They had, all this stuff. And the Afghan army just ran off. At that point, as we're watching this on satellites and our own drones and all this, airstrike should have been called in. That equipment should have absolutely been destroyed. And it's somebody should be held accountable that it wasn't. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, maybe we can send Beto over there. He's going to take away our AK-47. Maybe Beto can handle this. I mean,
well, the irony is, the State Department has banned now the importation of Russian-made ammunition for AK-47s, and the civilian version of that into this country. And I'm laughing. I'm going, what? Like what? Who's even in charge here? Who's making these kind of decisions?
Well, obviously, whoever the puppeteer is making these, but whoever wants us to look the weakest. And I might venture to say China. Chinese Communist Party. They want us to look weak. They want us
absolutely.
Weak. And they may not have to even fire a shot. I don't even know why they made a big military, because all they have to do now is send over the fentanyl and the heroin, and we'll just self-inflict, and they don't have to shoot a weapon. We'll doing it to ourselves. We're destroying ourselves with drugs.
Absolutely, and we are weakening our own nation through drug use and things like that. There's no doubt about that. But the Chinese have bigger ambitions. They have worldwide ambitions, and if you look at Chinese state-run media, as soon as the Taliban seized Kabul, the state-run media issued a notice to Taiwan saying this should be a lesson that you cannot count on the United States to save you. So they already fired a warning shot at Taiwan, basically saying, hey, we're coming for you, and don't think that the U.S. is going to be able to bail you out when we do.
So they have worldwide ambitions. We've known that for years, but we were the only thing in the way of their worldwide domination. Right.
And that's why something like this, and, people say, well, Tim, don't you think like it was time to get out of Afghanistan? There's a way we could have handled Afghanistan without making our country look weak to our enemies and our friends around the world, because both of those optics are important for our friends and our enemies, right? Exactly. We don't want to look weak because it's hard to keep friends when you look weak, right? So, I think that that's one of the real tragedies here, is that the ripple effect that this catastrophe is going to have for years to come. Right. Yeah. And if you look at it, and again, I go back to Vietnam because there's so many parallels to be drawn.
Yes.
Vietnam is, completely done in 1975 and taken over by the North Vietnamese. And then look at the rise in terrorism in the late 70s and early 80s, all across the Middle East and everywhere, right? And it's because, and Bin Laden touched on that before, right around the 9/11 attacks, where he said, don't worry about America, they're just a paper tiger. And he based that belief largely on what he had read about the way we left and abandoned Vietnam. And he felt like if you can just stick in there, inflict enough cuts, you don't have to do anything major, right? You don't have to get a fatal wound. You just got to inflict enough cuts to where we get tired and we quit. And I think just in order to honor our soldiers who have served for so long over there, we should have done it with dignity. We should have done it just by their name. To me, that's so disrespectful, the way that he did this to our country, taking us out of there the way that he did, disrespected every person who's ever served. Right.
Died. I mean, people, so many died, so many are maimed. And it's to me, it's beyond belief that somebody like, well, I'm just done with Biden. I don't know if I'll survive it. And
we're only 6 months in or 7 months in.
I know.
It's going to be a long 3.5 years.
Oh, gosh, it's going to be long. It's going to be so long, Tim. And only thing worse would be, of course, Kamala, because he's not long for this world, Biden, as far as his mind anyway. Yeah. He's not long for this world. I don't know. I'm giving it 15 months tops. And then they're going to talk about the 25th Amendment, I think.
I agree with that. I really do believe that his health and even just a speech like today, he didn't make any big blunders, but you could see, his wheels are just not turning, even with the teleprompter and everything, they're just not turning smoothly. I think the stress from all this, and like I said, this is only the beginning.
Mhm.
Wait until we have an attack on the homeland. And I don't wish that, but
None of us do.
I'm convinced that it's coming. And
I'm convinced only because the enemy strikes when you are weak. And he just showed the world that we are weak. That's when the enemy strikes.
We're unprepared. And like you said, look, there was a lot of security lapses that were pointed out in the 9/11 report, after 9/11 happened and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine if our border would have been as easy to penetrate as it is today, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could have even been worse than 9/11, right?
I know.
Because for the first time now, if you can carry successfully large bundles of drugs across the border, there's nothing to stop you from, instead of putting drugs into those duffel bags and into those bales, of putting explosives into those bales, of putting weapons into those bales, of putting all these different things. And it's been such a nationally discussed subject that I guarantee you, terrorists as far away as Africa, I don't care where you're a terrorist at, you know that the U.S. southern border right now is weak, vulnerable, and wide open. Yeah. And so if I'm in charge of planning attacks against the United States of America, I know where I need to send my fighters, and I know where I need to send the equipment that they're going to need.
Exactly. And, I don't know if you follow boxing, but I don't know about strategy as far as war and things like that, but just common sense from, I like to watch boxing. But a boxer, I mean, some of the most brutal matches that I've seen, they will injure the other boxer. And when that boxer is bleeding, that's where they're going to keep hitting.
Oh, absolutely.
They're going to hit there at the weakest spot until they fall down. And that is what Biden has given our enemy.
And what happens? What happens? And that's a good analogy. And what happens when that fighter stops fighting back and just covers up, right? And just puts his arms up? Does the other fighter stop fighting? No, that's when they really start raining down.
Then they really pound.
Right? That's when they really start, because they know he's vulnerable, and they know that the chance of them getting hit back is low. And so, that's why when Biden tries to talk tough, it just comes across as, so pathetic, because
where's Corn Pop when you need him?
Yeah.
I mean, I wish Corn Pop would have kicked his I really wish. I wish Corn Pop would have taken care of Biden for us a long time ago, and we wouldn't be having this problem. I'm thinking, out loud, but I feel for this country. I feel like we need to be really prepared to take care of ourselves. I don't know what you think about the new laws that will be instituted in the state of Texas as of September 1st, but I hear we're going to have the right to carry.
Right.
And I think that the timing is right. I know a lot of people are fearful, but I think the timing is right because of what's happening in the world and the defunding of the police in so many places like Austin. We're going to be on our own. They wanted the Wild Wild West. Well, they're going to probably get it because that border is still open and we still have enemies of this country. We have too much to lose. We have to be able to defend ourselves. Right out here where I live, at the CVS, a couple of people reported that some kids, I'm going to use that term loosely, approached them, an elderly person in their car, and said, do you have any money you can give me? It didn't have a weapon or anything, but I'm thinking if I was that person in the car, getting older, and the older you get, the more vulnerable you feel, I would have had a pistol and I would have said, you know what, you better step back. Because that is starting to happen. And I'm seeing more and more homeless encampments along the freeways. That's never been the case this far out from Austin.
Right.
And now they're everywhere. I'm thinking, what the heck? I mean, there's job openings all over.
Yeah. And what's funny is, we had Prop B, right? And the voters spoke. They got it on the ballot that the camping ordinance had to be reinstated, right? Right. And so the voters spoke, and the implementation of that by the city can only be described as very weak and very slow. Yes. You can tell their heart's not in it to get rid of these homeless encampments, even though under the law they're supposed to. Right. And that's one of the things that frightens me most for our country. We said, is our country going to survive? Right. I'm starting to see a tendency in our country that the rule of law no longer applies even at the highest levels. We just had the U.S. Supreme Court of the United States tell the Biden administration in no uncertain terms, you have to reinstate Trump's migrant protection protocols to where the asylum seekers have to remain in Mexico until their hearing date, right?
Right.
And to this day, I have seen nothing. It's been a week since the Supreme Court of the United States ruled on that. And all I'm seeing from the Department of Homeland Security is a whole lot of hand-wringing, stalling, filing of appeals.
So they're not doing it?
Not yet.
Nothing.
Not yet. It's been a week.
Oh my
and
gosh.
nothing.
Well,
and so, and this is what I'm saying. So if the Supreme Court of the United States rules, and if that doesn't mean anything anymore, and the government can say, well, and they came right out and said,
sort of.
it was the very next day after the ruling, they came out and said, well, we think the Supreme Court is wrong. Oh, okay.
And
well, that's how it works. So the Supreme Court rules,
well, I
and you can
disagree.
just feel like, that's wrong. We don't really have to do anything with that they tell us, you know?
Yeah.
And the danger in that is that now our system breaks down, right? Because now the entire way our country was designed to act on a checks and balances, right? Of the executive branch, the legislative, and the courts, right? Well, that's breaking down now because the government is deciding that, it's up to us to decide if we want to really do what the courts are saying or not, right?
Yeah.
So now the checks and balances goes away. Well, again, that leads to a loss of faith by the people in the system. And once you have the American people lose faith in the system, then that's a dangerous thing because, it'll,
we need to stop self-destructing as a country.
Absolutely.
I don't know how to start that, but it seems like we're self-destructing, and it's all from the inside. I saw a video of a teacher talking about how he was bragging about how he was indoctrinating these high schoolers and encouraging them to be a part of Antifa. And he was bragging about this. This is in Sacramento, I believe. He was bragging about it, and he gave them extra credit for going and participating in the riots.
Right.
Basically, a teacher.
Yeah.
We're self-destructing if this is what's acceptable at our public schools.
We just had another teacher, I believe it was in Utah, right, who went on this anti-Trump tirade in her classroom in a high school and then told the students, your parents don't know anything. Believe me, they're a lot dumber than you are. And this whole, it was a difficult video to watch. Like you were like, wow. And she even dared the kids to go tell on her. She was like, hey, go to office and tell them. I don't care. They're not going to do anything. And luckily the school removed her. But this is a high school classroom, and you go on and like then the teacher you mentioned, and it's becoming, we now have, we have activist teachers, practicing their activism in the classroom. Yeah. We have activist judges practicing their activism on the bench, right? And so, like you said, this is causing a breakdown in our country. We are self-destructing by doing these things, and it's very difficult. It's a difficult time.
We still outnumber them. We still outnumber the communists in our country. We still outnumber them. We have to remember that because they don't want us to remember that. They want to keep us divided. They want us to all not speak to each other like in social media. You don't want to have too much say in what's going on. So every one of my conservative friends, every one of us have been in Facebook jail. Every single one of us.
It's almost like a badge of honor nowadays.
It really is. I who knew that when I grew up, one of my favorite things to say would be, girl, you out of jail again? Because you're in jail all the time. My friends are always in Facebook jail. Why? Because we're conservative. We don't say vile things. We don't say, repulsive things. We don't show bloody body parts or anything crazy like that. We just say conservative things, but we end up in jail. Our President Trump he's not allowed to have a Twitter account.
Right. Imagine that. But the Taliban's
Yes.
spokesman can have a Twitter account.
Yes. So we're not allowed to speak, but teachers and stuff can go and do this kind of.
Right.
I went on one of my former professors' Facebook pages. I always check it out because I think you got to know what your enemy's up to, because this guy's just a bona fide communist. And ever since Biden's been elected, he's also a famous writer, so I'm not going to say too much, but ever since Biden has been elected, before Biden was elected, we've got to get Biden in there. Or before that, it was Bernie. And so, but now it was Biden. Now that Biden's been in there, crickets. Nothing.
Silence. That's one thing that is so telling right now. During this whole Afghanistan debacle, the liberals were absolutely silent in their support for Biden. Absolutely silent. And you know, we had one commentator on, I believe it was. What was his name? I can't remember, but he actually twittered out, "Deal with it," right? Like, yeah, we're out, and so it's good. Like, who cares what happened? That the Taliban took over the country. Deal with it. But he quickly had to take that down because the backlash was so intense from all across the political aisle that he immediately had to take that Twitter tweet down. So, you know, it's it just shows, right? Like you said, during Trump, they wanted to, you know. And same with the, you know, it's so the imbalance in this country with the media as a whole, right? Like if you look right now, you know, when Trump made a phone call to the Ukrainian president, right?
Yeah.
My God, it was all over the news for how many months, right?
Yeah.
The Mueller investigation, all these different things, right?
Russia.
It was nonstop every day.
24/7.
And now, you know, and constant calls for, you know, Trump's impeachment, right? And my question is, where are the calls right now? Where we haven't even heard a Democrat get up and say, this was such an embarrassment. What he just did to our country's honor in Afghanistan was such an embarrassment that at the very least, we need to have congressional hearings to determine who issued these orders, who went along.
Whose plan was this?
Exactly. Whose plan this was.
It's almost like China planned it for us.
Congress want to know.
It's almost like
I haven't
China.
heard anything. Have you heard anything? I haven't heard one.
I haven't heard a thing. No, not a thing.
You know?
Crickets.
And it's almost like they're like, if it's our guy, they can do whatever they want, right?
They're obscene.
You know,
it's obscene. And I'd like to see one of them just say, isn't Biden doing a great job? With a straight face. I mean, we'd be hard pressed to find that. Well, thank you so much for being on kathysright.com today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure as always.
Always talking to you. I'm so happy that I've gotten to know you, because your information is always valuable. Your point of view is always interesting and always eye-opening. And I appreciate you for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll talk to you soon. And bye.
Bye-bye.